Hey, how you doing? This is John, and welcome to John's Longbox. I'm here live with George O'Connor, the creator of the Olympians and the Asgardians. How you doing? I'm so glad to talk to you.
I'm so glad to be here. Let me apologize up front. You guys don't know about this behind the scenes. I was a hard person to nail down. John has been very, very, very patient as I've been on deadline. And when I'm on deadline, I draw all the time and I don't answer emails sometimes for up to a week at a time. My editors could complain about that to you.
Oh, really? I wasn't going to say anything. They don't know the drama behind the scenes. But yes.
I like to just get it up front. Yes, I am hard to nail down. But here I am, and I'm excited to be here, John.
That's been my whole philosophy. I've been doing this for 3 years, and the regular viewers know if you don't say no, you didn't say no. So, yeah. Hey, you want to come on my channel? Well, I'm busy. Okay. And then 2 months later, hey, you want to come on my channel? So I wear people down, but so that's how
you're persistent with a group of cartoonists, notoriously flaky people. We're good at making our deadlines, maybe, and we're bad at everything else. That's my theory.
So, okay, well, now we got the mystery out of the way. For those of you who don't know, George is doing these wonderful series of books that I bought in soft cover to read and hardcover to keep in plastic for all eternity because I'm that kind of crazy person. You started out doing the Greek gods.
Yep.
The series was called, and these, when I look it up on my database software, it's First, Second Comics, The Olympians, featuring Zeus. So it was difficult for me to find and scan these in. Now you're doing the Asgardians.
Yeah.
Another series. And how many issues is that going to be? The Olympians.
Olympians was 12 because if you're someone who's a fan, these are very the retellings of classic mythology, and so I'm trying to be very accurate while still putting my own spin on them to the original myths. If you're somebody who knows your general myths, both Norse and Greek, there's a lot of Greek mythology. There's not a lot of Norse mythology that survived, unfortunately. Right. So whereas Olympians was 12 books, and I still have room to do plenty more, Asgardians is going to only be 4, and I'm going to virtually do every single story that survives in those 4 books.
Oh, okay. I was hoping for 12. Just 12 isn't.
Oh, man, I wish, because I love Norse mythology, and it's just not much that exists. And so much of what is out there is you kind of have to guess about stuff. Like, it just didn't survive to us in the same ways that the Greeks did, where there was so many different written versions. There's essentially 2 sources. There's the Poetic Edda, and then there's the Prose Edda. And then there's little drips and drabs here and there. But, pretty much everything we know about Norse mythology comes from those 2 sources.
Yeah. I got to ask, were you Genuine Comics? This is Dave Brink. I was just talking about your comics. He does a great comic called Perfect 10. I just want to give him a shout out.
Great title.
Yeah, it's a good comic. A European does American superhero comics better than most Americans. It's great.
Europeans do comics good.
Yeah, they're really good. Have you been a lifelong mythology fan? Like, when I was a little kid, I don't know where it came from, but there was a hardcover of Edith Hamilton's mythology just in my bedroom as a kid. I think my older brother read it, lost interest, and I struggled to read it. Like, it was advanced for me, and I just stayed out it. And I've had that book in that little copy's been on my bookshelf since 3rd grade, and I read it.
I have my paperback of Edith Hamilton downstairs from when I think it was about maybe 9 or 10. For me, I've been a lifelong mythology fan. I actually got into mythology a little bit before I got into comics, and the 2 they're very connected. D'Aulaire's Book of Greek Myths?
No, I don't.
It's this big orange one. You probably know it if you've seen it. It's a book basically. I'm sorry, go on.
I was just saying, I think I do recognize it now. Once you said it was a big orange book.
Yeah, it's got like a picture of like a sun god on it. It's a great retelling. So when I was in 3rd grade, I was in a school program where we did an extended studying of Greek mythology, where we had to dress up as our favorite gods and do oral reports and everything.
Who'd you dress up
as? Hermes.
Oh, okay. That's
Of
your
course,
favorite?
he's if you've read Olympians, folks, you're probably not surprised to hear he was my favorite. He's still my favorite.
I
I
think
like
he's my favorite too.
yeah, I like the gods who are like, he's very powerful. He can, move faster than the speed of light, but I like that he basically uses his wits to do everything. And he causes trouble. He's a fun character. He's
That means Loki's your favorite Asgardian.
No, I think Odin is.
Yeah.
It's hard to say. I feel like Odin and Loki are very
Very
two
similar.
sides of the same coin. Yeah.
We'll talk about Odin a bit because we were talking before. Odin is my favorite fictional character of all time, and he's nastier and meaner than if you're used to from Marvel Comics.
Yeah, and he's in Marvel. Oh, so actually, that's my thing. I got into Greek mythology, and then I got into Greek mythology. Eventually, got into Norse mythology, and then from there, I got into. My mom bought me a comic of Thor, the Marvel comic superhero, and we read a lot of comics in my household. But this was the series that I really got into because super into mythology. It was during Walt Simonson's run.
Oh my god, you got it! It's one of the best runs of all comics.
It's amazing, and he is somebody I very much have based my career on because my intro to him was during Thor. He is writing it. He's providing the artwork. This is before Sal Buscema comes on to help him out.
Yeah.
And it looks great. And I'm reading mythology and he's the specific first issue I got was the one where it's Fafnir the dragons on the cover.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen anything quite like Simonson's artwork. Although I guess I had a few issues of Star Wars around the house that he had drawn, but that's with Tom Palmer ink, so it didn't look like his stuff.
Yeah, Tom Palmer just takes over everything.
Tom Palmer is a strong spice. You put some Tom Palmer on another artist, it's going to look like Tom Palmer.
Yep.
But with this, seeing this, he's pulling on the Kirby inspiration. He's pulling on actual Norse inspiration. He's doing these stories that are telling very accurate stories to the myths as much as he can within the Marvel Comics framework. It really blew my mind. It made me become a lifetime comics fan, superhero comics. And this is about 6th grade. I started drawing my first ever comics around them. And I did an 18-page comic retelling Ragnarok, the Norse gods' death and stuff. No, in fact, I'll be honest, I didn't finish it. I got about 18 pages and I'm I got to the cool bits where all the gods died, but I'm there's the whole
all the gory bits, but all that backstory, who cares about that? I want to see Vidar smashing people.
I had Vidar splitting the jaws of Fenrir the wolf after eating Odin, but I didn't get up to Surt. I remember that. I was Surt burning everything and then the gods being reborn to whatever extent. We're talking some hardcore myth stuff here, folks. If you're what is all this stuff?
Oh, yeah.
But and then I did a comic called The Thunderers, which was Viking superheroes. That I still have somewhere, and I know that pages of that exist online. But so for me, because of that 1-2 punch of being a myth kid who was introduced to the work of Walt Simonson, the two always became inextricably linked, comics and mythology. So it makes sense. I grew up to do Olympians and Asgardians. I do want to point this out too. You wouldn't have seen this yet because this book's not out yet. This is my copy of Thor, the second book of Asgardians. And
Odin just came out.
Odin came out. This comes out October 8th. We're doing 2 books in the first year just to really to make it a strong launch. Where is I want to read the dedication to you because I think you'd appreciate it.
It's dedicated to me. Thank you.
Oh no, for Walt Simonson.
I'll hold my Thor hammer while.
Nice. Yeah, the Thor book is for Walt Simonson, whose Thor was very mighty indeed.
Oh, that is awesome.
This is the book that was his stuff, made me want to do what I do for a living,
Yeah, that is great. That is touching. I'm so glad that you're into that. Do you get Walt Simonson's new series? He did a series of Ragnarok that is a continuation.
I've looked at it a little bit. One of the things when I'm working on myth stuff is I try not to read other people's takes on the myths because I don't want to accidentally rip off. There's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of room for your own spin on story. and I don't want to have an innovation or an idea that Walt Simonson or any creator comes up with show up in mine as like where I'm accidentally ripping them off.
Yeah,
so whenever I'm doing Olympians or Asgardians, I go back to original sources, and then I read all the stuff afterwards. I'm like, oh, these are cool, but like I don't want to accidentally steal his.
You didn't read the Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman and P. Craig Russell just did some Norse mythology too.
No, and like P. Craig Russell, I mean, I've flipped through it a little bit at my library or when I'm in a comic shop. P. Craig Russell too is like one of my favorite artists. Yeah. So like the temptation for that is brutal. And like I feel like if you were to look at my work, he's one of the more recognizable influences, particularly more in Olympians. I'm moving away from that style with Asgardians, but I feel like a lot of my storytelling comes from P. Craig Russell. He's really good at doing silent reaction panels, for instance, and I know that's something I do a lot. And he's also just one of the best drafts people in comics. Yeah. And he brings beauty. I know he just brings such beauty to stuff. It's so weird too. Like, I mean, you know your comics, so like seeing how he like kind of starts off, like, and then just disappears from the biz for a little bit and comes back, and like he's clearly working from photo reference or something, and he just like it's. I like if you think of like that weird Ant-Man run he did, and like not in.
Yeah, that was
Bizarre Adventures, and then like it's like halfway through that practically he changes. And then like, you know, of course, like you look at his early Killraven stuff and like, it's like, that's P. Craig Russell. And then like, by the time he gets up to like the Killraven graphic novel, like that's P. Craig Russell. That dude's astounding.
Yeah. He's so good. Well, has nothing to do with this, but I discovered him on that Elric of Melniboné is when I was like, yeah, he did that for Marvel Comics. That was, speaking of which, I might as well bring this out. But, you know, I'm a big Dungeons and Dragons guy, so this I don't know if are you familiar with this book at all?
I am. I don't have it, but I've known like so. My extent with Dungeons and Dragons as a kid, I liked it to draw it as an excuse to draw cool monsters. I didn't have a group of friends that I could play it with. Like we couldn't organize that way. As an adult with some other comics professionals, we played like a game. Like there was just a time. I had a comic studio in Brooklyn with like Riley Brown, who is a cartoonist, probably best known for working on Cable and Deadpool. And Kari Randolph was there just to make fun of us. And a few other cartoonists. Like we would just meet every week at a local bar. And we played like one D&D adventure. And it was so fun. And I would love to do it again. But I was very much aware of the deities thing because
you know, this is all the Greek gods and all the Norse gods and, you know, Japanese, and then the Cthulhu. This introduced me to Cthulhu, and so this is like the most influential book in my life. You know, it connects comics, mythology, and Lovecraft and pulp fiction. So I was just wondering,
do they put actual stats on the gods?
Yeah. You said Luke. You said Hermes was your favorite.
Yeah, he better have good stats.
Hermes. Where's Hermes? Yeah, he's got some good stats. Where is he? Where is he? Hermes. Okay. 340 hit points. Armor class -2. And he's a 15th level ranger, 15th level illusionist, 25th level thief. He's the highest level thief in the
That's appropriate. All right, nice. For the god of thievery, that makes sense.
And it's funny because of that, when we played, we're like, you can't be a higher level thief than Hermes. So 25 was like the upper level. You know, rules kids make. Kids are very logical.
Yeah, I have a term for them because I encounter them a lot now when I do signings. And I was a well actually kid. They're very like they know the rules better than any adult. And if you misspeak for a second about something, if you say like if you were to say Hermes, you know, isn't as good a thief as this, well, actually, Hermes is, you know, kids know their stuff.
So that's what bringing back to your wonderful books. Some of these aren't open yet because I'm a crazy person, but I just want to show off. You have notes. I don't know if you can see with the glare, but you have notes for discussion for classrooms, and you have footnotes that reference the primary sources. So to me,
yeah,
I was a school teacher for a very short period. This is something that I would use as a resource teaching this stuff at school. Is that one of your goals?
Oh, Yeah, absolutely. So, a really awesome thing about, like, I guess you would like, so there's you speak to a lot of comics professionals, and traditionally the comics industry was kind of founded on wait, can we curse on this? I forget.
Do whatever you want.
How about we say cruddy? There's been some
Okay,
crappy business practices behind a
okay.
lot of comics. It's been very exploitative. And I tend not to do most of my work in that outgrowth of comics. I tend to do it from like the more traditional book publishers. First Second is a division of Macmillan. It's one of the 5 big publishers. And it's nice because they treat you better. There's there's not the baked in exploitation, but it also made me very cognizant of things like schools and libraries as a big market.
Yeah.
So much of the direct market, you put it out there and it goes into a comic shop, and comic shops are of varying quality, widely varying quality all over the country. Some places don't have them. One of the great things about doing stuff that I do, where I make it educational as well, with the footnotes, with the discussion questions, is I'm used in a lot of schools. I'm used in a lot of libraries. And then that is a great way of kind of like, not that I do this in a totally mercenary way, but it does get my work out there where it's a constantly regenerating fan base. If you're in a classroom, there's new kids in that classroom every single year. And so it's not like you're not putting your book out into a comic shop, and then once it's not on the front list anymore, kind of, if you're lucky, they pick it up and carry it as a back, like, list title. But so much of comics, it's just been like they would put it out there and they just kind of be out there for a little bit and then disappear. By doing like something that can appeal to younger readers in addition to older readers, it gives the series a longevity and frankly sales that you wouldn't see otherwise.
Yeah.
Plus, then you get to visit school classrooms as another way of like promoting your work.
And it's especially with the Greek mythology, there's a little bit of like, let's just say, spicy topics, and you handle it really well. Like, you don't just hand wave it and dismiss it. You address some of these things, but you do it with humor and I, because I've been saying along, kids aren't stupid, and kids know when they're being pandered to. You're not pandering to kids. What's that?
No, I'm agreeing with you 100%. You are speaking my language here.
Right. First off, all my cards on the table, I'm a big fan of all ages literature. Like, my comic, Heroic Tales, is all ages. And when I say all ages, I mean, I'm hoping adults can enjoy it, and I hope children can enjoy it. And when I say that to people, sometimes people get a little wonky, and I'm like, you forget Star Wars is all ages. Yeah. Peter Pan is all ages. Harry Potter is all ages. And Charlotte's Web, and I could go on and on and on. The Hobbit. This is stuff that has stood the test of time. And in my own experience, I was a little kid who could barely read, but I wanted to know Greek mythology so much. I wish I had your books when I was in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. You know what I mean? Because I learned how to read through comics, and then from comics, I was able to go to Edith Hamilton's and the other Robert Graves and everything like that. And I was just about to go on and on and on, but I realized I talk too much sometimes.
No, but you are so absolutely correct. Like, I remember as a kid, like, when adults would speak down to me, it would immediately be the biggest turnoff.
Right.
And you said, like, I think kids mostly, like, okay, the kids don't have as much life experience as adults, but I think there's probably more smart kids than there's adults. Like, kids, you meet, like, they're bright. They're super bright. They're very smart.
I remember so many times me and my friends sitting around a tree discussing philosophy. Like, I remember, like, we were playing with little bugs. We got sticks. We're playing with bugs. And my friend Danny just goes like, do you think there's a God that God worships? And is there a God that, we were creating this hierarchy. And then we'd like, what if like Zeus is just like a superhero and then the God is his boss? And this is me and Danny talking philosophy around a tree. And I think, and then we get older and I'm like, I got a mortgage and, and I got to pay car. And we don't talk about, but kids are natural philosophers.
And so kids are super smart and they know when you're talking down to them. I'm very lucky in that I have been so far, knock on wood, I've been able to mostly kind of thread the line between not ever speaking down to kids and being pretty blunt about what's happening in these stories, and not really getting a lot of the wrong sort of people getting the wrong sort of message. It's happened here or there. There's a I could mention certain areas of the country where they're more fond of banning books as opposed to using, and like there's been places where my books don't get as popular as they could be there because of that. But I don't know. How scared are you of an idea that you feel like you need to take it out of a kid's hand, Like, isn't it better that they encounter these thoughts in the safest way possible by reading about it, where it's open to discussion and thinking about? Isn't that what you want from people?
You don't shy away. Like, you taught me the word nictorate.
And for those of you who don't know what nictorate means, it means
don't look that up, everybody. But it's part of the Greek mythology. You know what I mean? So you included it in, and then when you had the footnote to it, you made it humorous and silly.
Yeah, I think that's specifically, if I recall, that was my retelling of Orion. For those of you who don't know, Orion the Great Hunter, Orion's belt, his creation story, so to speak, is 3 Olympian gods got together. It was Hermes, Zeus, and Poseidon, and all decided to piss on a bear skin to make like the perfect hunter. Yeah. And I use the term micturate throughout because I think it was funny. You know where I got micturate from? The Big Lebowski.
Oh, I saw that. I must have forgot it. Yeah.
When the actual Big Lebowski is yelling at the dude about like having people micturate. Yeah, you micturate on my rug.
That's funny. That's funny. But then, like, Zeus romping with a lot of women. You lighten the blow, but you don't avoid the blow. You know what I mean? Like, you understand who your audience is. Because Edith Hamilton didn't lighten the blow. Like, she specifically said, like, Poseidon raped Persephone.
Yeah.
And I remember going to ask my mother what these words meant, and she's like, "What are you reading?" And then I remember in college talking about Edith, and he's like, "Yeah, well, this is, explaining everything. It wasn't literary or whatever, but again,
there's ways to say it where it's
right. That's
the way
you saved me from embarrassing myself. Yes.
Well, the way that I use as my main example of like the sort of way to present this material, in the Greek creation myth, there are the Titans, and they are the first generation of gods after Gaia and Uranos, right? Earth and sky, basically. And when Kronos, who's the leader of the Titans, takes over in the original myths, he takes his sickle and he castrates his father Uranos.
Right.
And there's no way to present that artwork and have that, like, it didn't. I actually saw a comic where somebody drew it just like a big guy hitting another guy in the crotch with a sickle, and it looked frankly comical. Like, it doesn't give you the grandeur of a creation myth. So the way I tell that story in Zeus, Uranos, the god of the sky, his name literally means sky. So rather than make him a big dude, I made him the sky. He's this personified object. And when Kronos, the Titan, castrates him, I don't come out and say that. That's a very human term. I use the term, he slices open the sky and Uranos was rendered impotent. All his power bled away. And so I'm getting the same bit in there, but I get to play with the visuals in a way where it's like this light pouring out of the sky by making this one figure not making him personified. He is the sky. He shouldn't look like a dude. He's the sky. He's bigger than just one person. So it's just ways to play with it and think of it in terms of like both like having people get upset because there's a picture of a castration happening in their comic, or also just opening up the visuals to like a more frankly majestic way of depicting it.
Yeah, really, really good. And like I said, you use primary sources and you quote your sources in the back. So
yeah,
it's cartoony, accessible to children. It's comic booky. Like again, I could show it. But do you go what resources do you get? Do you go like on research? Do you go to libraries? Like, Do you have access to other books? Do you read Greek?
So yeah, here's my big shame. I don't read ancient Greek, so I am reliant on translations. I only use primary sources. It has to be either an ancient Greek or ancient Roman or somebody who ostensibly believed in these gods. I try not to use retellings at all because of what I was saying up front. Like, I don't want to steal something from somebody else's spin. So the library has been a great aid in that. I have a pretty good personal collection now. If I was recording this downstairs in my library, there's just like, collections of like old books and such. I look for translations of ancient Greek or Norse sources. And because I don't speak ancient Norse or ancient Greek, if possible, I try to read more than one translation. So like if I'm going for like a Hesiod, he's like, his theogony was like my main inspiration point from Olympians, how to describe how the world was built. I didn't just read one translation. I read 3 translations of it, because then you can kind of feel a little bit more of what's there. What was the translator's spin on it? There's a lot of online sources that are amazing helps for this. There's various archives of different manuscripts. There's a great website I credit in the back of all Olympians, Theoi, which is Greek word for gods, THEOI.com. Unfortunately, it would never seem to have been completed. It was a resource where you look up a god, say Poseidon, and it mentions all the different myths you might find Poseidon in. And I would use that as a source then to find sources to read those actual books. So it's a cool way of working because it gives me the scholastic bent, but it also it helps me find a lot of interesting stuff that's there but kind of overlooked. We all know these kind of stereotype versions of these myths, but when you go back to the primary sources, there's all this really cool and wild stuff that people have kind of just streamlined out of them. And going back to these older documents, it would often give me a more nuanced look into these stories I was retelling, give me more options in the direction I wanted to head down than it would have otherwise.
Yeah, I thought I was pretty good with Greek mythology. Reading your books, I was like, wait, I don't recall this story, and I had to go out and read them. You quoted your sources and everything, so I had to go out and read them. I'm trying to think of one exactly. I think the birth of now I'm embarrassing myself. I can't remember his name. Dionysus and his mother. Semele. You know what I mean? I was like
Semele, yeah.
I was like, I think I remember that story, but the whole thing like stuck in Zeus's thigh. I was like,
oh, I love that story. It's the only story that explains what an Olympian really looks like.
Yeah, that was a real cool story. And then Hermes hit him with the sword to cut him out of that. You know what I mean? I was like, this is just the original dysfunctional family.
Yeah, I say that all throughout the books, all over the place, but it's so interesting that, like, I mean, Greek gods, there are people who still believe in them for sure. Like, I get letters from them. But
really?
it's oh yeah, and I get invited to speak. Most people are pretty cool with I remember early on when I first had done Zeus, I had some neo-Hellenist pagans write me who seemed pretty angry at what I was doing.
Really?
But I think it was just because it was early in the series. Nowadays, the people who write me seem to be pretty happy with it. I don't know that there's so many enormous organized groups. I think it's like small groups of people who do it here and there. But it's it is interesting, and like you want to be respectful of these people's beliefs and such. I feel like I lost what was I going on for there? I was
that some people still believe, and then I asked you, do they get upset with you? And you said no, because it's funny because when I was in college, I sat next to this kid. He was the skinny, nice guy, skinniest kid, long blonde hair. Like I used to describe him, he looked like Elven Thor. If you took a Tolkien elf, but like Thor at the same time, and he had a necklace with a hammer on it. And I was like, that's like a Thor hammer. And he goes, oh yeah, I worship Thor. And I thought he was kidding. So I laughed, and we got to be friendly over the course of the semester. And he was like, yeah, I have a group, and we have. So I went. How could I not? How often do you get to do this? And it was a bunch of, Americans, neo-pagans worshiping Thor. And I was just like, oh man, he's like, are you disappointed? I was like, yeah, I thought we were all gonna be drinking and fist fighting by midnight. I mean, this is supposed to be
I thought it was
Thor.
gonna be like Valhalla.
Yeah, I thought there was gonna be like beautiful buxom women with like beer over their shoulder. You know what I mean? It's like this. I mean, you guys are nice, but I didn't expect nice from Thor worshippers. So he was a little annoyed.
I guess you have to form your own group. That's when you form your own group to worship Thor. That's what you bring to it.
Yeah, that's like, will you go worship Thor over there? Stay away from me. We're gonna court order to keep you away from our Thor group. Now, like, so you said now you're doing as Guardians. Do you get letters from people who still worship like Norse? Because I went to my wife took me to Iceland on my 50th birthday, and they still have statues and like I never met anybody who in Iceland who worships, but they take it pretty seriously, and they get like it would be like making fun of George Washington or something like that. Like you know they're very proud of it, and they were very proud of that the Eddas were preserved in Iceland rather than Norway, and they said that they speak better Old Norse than the Norwegians do. You know, they're very, they got, you know, how like
the Scandinavian countries are very competitive. I've noticed. Yeah, it is very funny. Yeah, I'm actually going to be, I don't remember the name of it offhand, but there is a podcast I'm going to be on that is, it seems like it's a podcast where they treat the worship of the Asgardians, the Norse gods, I should say, as a very serious thing. This is something that's being set up through my publisher even. So like they went through the trouble of like contacting, you know, First Second and requesting. So I'm like, yeah, that'll be exciting to be on.
That is pretty cool. That is pretty cool. Now, I wanted to ask you, like, when I was a kid, like I showed you, I got your book still in shrink wrap because I'm that kind of crazy person. So I've always been like, I organize my comics. The only thing I don't organize is my board games, but that's besides the point. But I organize everything. I put things in order, and I get freaked out when I found out that I read this comic, but I didn't read this comic before it. I'm like, this is supposed to be. So when I was reading Greek mythology, I was starting to get like, you know, Hercules must have happened, you know, during Jason and the Argonauts because he was a member of the Argonauts. So that means Theseus had to be, and I literally was writing a timeline of all Greek myths, and then it was getting me mad that sometimes they contradicted each other. So you can imagine.
Oh, they definitely don't.
You know, but you put them in a really good order. Now, did you do that? You have to find other sources to put them in order, or is this your order, or is this the order? I need to know because I'm a crazy person who needs to know.
All right, so the order doesn't exist for sure. Like, because the thing to remember about Greek mythology is it's a series of beliefs that like formed over like, you know, span of over 1,000 years in different regions where there wasn't like, they didn't have like a Gutenberg Bible where they could write down one version. So I had to kind of make my own personal system of what I like. I mentioned Hesiod, his theogony. I actually had a phrase I would use throughout writing Olympians is Hesiod above all. I decided his version, which is he and Homer are two of our oldest sources, literary sources. I'm like, his version of the birth of the gods and their relationship, I'm going to use as my basis. I'm going to use other ones that work within that framework as much as I can make it work. Sometimes there's just contradictions. Like it's funny. You mentioned like the Heracles thing. Like, yeah, Heracles is a member of Jason and the Argonauts. That's well known. Sometimes they'll have Perseus be a member of the Argonauts, but Perseus is Heracles' grandfather.
Right.
It doesn't work. So even within the actual myths, there's all these contradictions. Like sometimes the birth of Athena, she's famously born from the head of Zeus. Sometimes she is freed by Zeus's head by Hephaestus. He comes and takes his hammer and splits open her skull. But then there's another version of the birth of Hephaestus where he was birthed by Hera solo because she was jealous that Zeus had given birth to Athena solo. Yes. I'm like, you can't have both. So, and I didn't like that story anyway. So in my stories, yeah, Hephaestus frees Athena from Zeus's head, but you know, he's not a weird child only from Hera. There's a lot of weird sexism in the stories that like I try to correct as much as I can, not writing anything that's contradictory, but at least choosing the strains of myth that don't seem like they're outright propaganda against Hera, for instance. She's one of my favorites. And there's a lot of versions of stories where they make her the bad guy. I'm like, I don't think she's necessarily the bad guy. I think Zeus is kind
funny
of
because I'm pretty sympathetic to Hera too. I'm just like, just imagine if your spouse was out banging everything literally in creation, and sometimes they're not even human. You know?
Yeah.
And it's
and when they are, he takes different forms too. He's like, you know what? I'm gonna have sex with that lady as an ant. What do you think about that? It's like, I think that's weird.
Well, stop me. Yeah. And then
and she's literally the goddess of marriage, and her husband is the worst jerk around. So
I remember when the Disney Hades or the Disney Hercules movie came out, my friend was like, I can't believe that, like Hercules is saying mom to Hera. And then my friend goes, when Hera is the goddess of evil. I said, what do you mean the goddess of evil? He goes, well, he tortured Hercules. I'm like, have you read the myths? It's it's not like she's the goddess of evil. I said, she's the goddess of like, my husband's a jerk and I can't beat him because he's the king, so she takes her frustration out on Hercules, his favorite son, but she's not the goddess of evil.
This is what I like to say to that. So, his Greek name, Hercules, is the Roman corruption of it, right? His Greek name is Heracles, which means the glory of Hera. So that's really interesting there, right? It's like, why is he named the glory of Hera? And there's different stories that explain that. But when I was doing my book on Hera, I was kind of looking at putting myths in age order, like the older stories, the ones that originally came about. There's a really cool story that the Milky Way, we all know the Milky Way. It literally, that name was originated in ancient Greece. And the story was that Hera was breastfeeding baby Heracles. He wasn't Heracles yet. He was Alcides. And he was sucking on her so hard that when she pulled away, there was this spray across the heavens. And that created the Milky Way. I'm like, so that's interesting. Why is his worst enemy, who he's strangely named after, breastfeeding him? And when you look at the older stories, it seems like at one point he was actually a hero of her. And as the story has changed over the hundreds of years, she became the main adversary in his stories. But like clearly there's this version where he was actually an actual champion of her, the same way Jason was. So it's interesting playing with this. You go through these depths of history, these depths of myth, and you find different versions of these stories. And when I would reconstruct my timeline for Olympians, I would try to find the one that seemed truest to that earlier version, before Hera was vilified, before she was cast in the role of this jealous shrew.
With the rolling pin, right? Yeah.
It's like, no, she's so much more than that.
And it's funny because in that Deities and Demigods, you look at her, she's beautiful, and you're like, in my mind, she was always like like Clarence, get back to the house. Like an old evil.
Wait, why Clarence?
I don't know. I don't know why I said that.
That's Zeus's human name. Everybody knows that. When Zeus is on Earth, he's called Clarence.
You never read the myth of Clarence? And then
Clarence and the Golden Fleece.
Yeah. Yeah, Clarence and the brass shoehorn. I don't know. Are you familiar with a comic by now it's Eric Shanauer, I think it is, the
Age of Bronze? Yeah,
beautiful. I'm a big fan of that comic also.
Yeah, he's a tremendous talent. One of like the most solid drafts people out there. Like Eric draws every single thing. Somebody said Milky Way. Ew. Eric draws every single thing to like such a level of perfection. And what's awesome about Age of Bronze, if y'all don't know it, it's very accurate to the actual period that the stories are set in. He recreates Minoan Greece. Well, that's kind of he recreates Minoan society, I guess. Right. Like when I draw these stories, I very purposely, there's historical accuracy to a degree in my books, but I am drawing mythic Greece. This is a world where the gods are real.
Talking about mythology. Eric Shanauer was trying to make it as historically accurate as
possible.
Yeah, and he's trying to remove all the supernatural
Yeah, which I'm always like, some part of me, it's like that a few years ago, there was, I mean, a few years ago, it's probably 20 years ago now. Wolfgang Petersen's Troy did that too. I'm like, really? You're going to retell the Trojan War with no gods in it? Like,
that's
that
the
seems
fun
a
part.
mistake. I know, that's the cool stuff. So, like my book, Ares, is me retelling the Trojan War with only the gods bits. I'm like, this is how it looked to the gods' point of view. Yeah, why take out the cool stuff? Yeah, so Eric, yeah, he's doing this very historically accurate version, removing the deities, which I'm like, I mean, hey, do it your own, but beautiful books. I love them so much.
Yeah, I just wish he would continue. I think he's only doing them online now.
Yeah, and also he works slowly because he is his style. I mean, if you look him up, if you're unfamiliar with him, listeners, look up Eric Shanauer. The guy can draw, but I think it takes a long time to draw like that.
Yeah, what I love those. It was one of the few comics my father actually enjoyed reading, and he's not a comic book guy, but it was history for him. You know, it was and he did the same thing. He did scholastic academic sources in the back. Like I didn't know about. I mean, I knew about Linear B, but I didn't know that we can't read it. You know,
I think it's, or is it linear? Linear. One of them. There was a couple of languages. There's Linear A and Linear B. One we can read, one we can't, and I forget which. Look that up over here.
Like the you know the Homer, the Greeks that he lived in classical Greek, talking about like Bronze Age Mycenaean Greek.
Yeah,
that's still a mystery to us. Like this is just our interpretation, but we still don't really know everything because we can't read it. I think I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, and even Homer, he was writing about what was ancient history to Homer.
Right.
So he is recording stuff that happened in the Mycenaean and Minoan periods, but he's writing from a much later period himself. So it's interesting when you read analyses of Homer, if Homer is one person or two, who knows, right? But even there's bits that maybe kind of like are a little anachronistic,
like
or it's Homer massaging it.
They ride the chariots and then get off to battle, rather than you know the tactics are wrong, you know, things like that. But it makes for good, exciting stories.
And it's wild too. It's like the stuff is being recorded, and something I often like to talk about is like, when I got into this stuff as a kid, it was because it was full of cool monsters and violence and, you know, naked ladies and stuff. And as an adult, well, you read it, and you read it as an adult, or you revisit these stories, and it's so wild because, you know, you're capturing these human elements that have been passed down for generations. Like, these stories are thousands of years old, and they'll just be like a really great like description in the middle of Iliad or something that just like, wow, that just captures something that you would still write nowadays. And it shows you like this weird connection of like this continuum of like human thought, the way and so much of like what we know about stories in general comes from these ancient sources. Like our concept of story comes from like the Greeks. Like, you read the Odyssey, and like there's like that story begins in media res. Like the story is already beginning. They go back and flashback show the rest. Like they have sophisticated like storytelling techniques already being used in these ancient stories. It's super cool. I'm geeking out here. Sorry.
Oh no, don't. This is exactly what I want. This is exactly like I view my channel as, let's pretend we're meeting in a comic book store and I'm picking up your book and we're just geeking out over Greek mythology. You know,
I'm just hanging out in the comic store.
Yeah, we're hanging out in the comic store. Just imagine, like, if I had access to a time machine, I would love to go back to the Library of Alexandria and get all of the plays and myths that we don't have. Like, one of the things I've been kind of fascinated with is I forget who said it, but in Greek society, the women were sequestered. You know, it was basically very rarely, like, we know of a few women, like some famous prostitutes and some famous philosophers, but the average woman, they probably had their own myths and stories that we don't know anything about, like really lost to time. I would love to know all of those stories. You know, like I could just imagine all the men go, George, let's come over to my house. My women are having like a Friends of Hera meeting tonight. Let's get out of here.
It's funny you mentioned that, and you mentioned Hera, because there are traces of stuff that, so Hera was principal goddess of the Greeks. And there's a lot of archaeological evidence to show she was probably dominant over Zeus for much of ancient history. and became a later thing where Zeus becomes the ascendant god. And I have a bit where I'm trying to piece this together. It's in my book, Hera.
Well, the Etruscans were a patriarchal society, right? And then
yeah, I don't know. I mean, they definitely had a primary goddess up front. It's hard to say how much, matriarchal or matriarchal, but here's a line from my book, Hera, about that very thing you're talking about. Okay. There is a story they tell of Hera. It is a story that only the women knew, for when the men of ancient Greece wrote down their stories, they did not think to ask the women theirs. But what is known as this, and I go on to tell the story. And so it's me actually retelling a story that we know a little bit of because some bits of it have been recorded. But yeah, there was entire bodies of mythology related to Hera, to other goddesses, to other gods, and that we just don't know anymore because they weren't the ones writing it down.
You also hint about this in Asgardians, that there's a lot of Norse myths that are just lost.
So much lost. It's so frustrating. I hate it so much.
Yeah.
The Norse one is so like with the Greek thing, at least there's so much that does exist.
Right.
And there's so much scholarship on it. There's so many people who work to reconstruct things. We have hints of stuff that existed. With Norse mythology, when it comes down to like when people are like, yeah, we're not even sure if Frigg and Frey are the same goddess or not. I'm like, come on. That's very frustrating. And there's like little snippets of things. So just to get like super geeky. So like I mentioned up front, the two main sources are the Prose Edda and the Poetic Edda. The Poetic Edda is a collection of various poems that were written about like Norse mythology. And then the Prose Edda, this guy Snorri Sturluson, in like I think it's in the 1200s, he writes down his own version in prose of various overviews of Norse mythology. And he's pulling on older sources. And sometimes he quotes things directly that we later found in the the Poetic Edda. And sometimes he quotes stretches of poetry that he's quoting that are just lost to us. So we'll have these hints, like it's like, oh, well, we know this. Like we know that there was a whole epic poem about Heimdall, and that's just gone. Like, there's this weird, and there's be weird references. Like there's a little snippet in one line about like the pool that Odin's eye in is also where Heimdall holds his hearing. And we're like, what the hell does that mean? And like one of the theories is that like, so Odin, if you don't know, he famously pulled out his eye in exchange for wisdom. He put into the well of Mimir. And there's people who think that like Heimdall probably cut his ear off in a similar thing in a story we don't have. And I like that theory. In my books, I'm telling you, if you look, I never show it clearly, but Heimdall's missing an ear. There's a bit where, because I like that idea, but it's not concrete enough that I can address it as 100%. But whenever I do show Heimdall without his helmet, he's always got his hand over his one ear because, I think that Heimdall, there's probably a story out there that's lost to us where Heimdall traded one of his ears in exchange for either sharper senses or more wisdom or something. But we don't have that story anymore. Yeah. So look for my one-eared Heimdall, everybody.
Oh, there you go.
I actually had to redraw a paddle just the other day because this is in my book Loki I'm working on right now, where I had drawn Heimdall from the one side with his helmet off. I'm like, oh, that's the ear I decided wasn't there. So I had to move a hand up over it. So he's covering up his possibly severed ear.
what
Loki would find a way. Yeah, Loki is not big on self-sacrifice. Right. So Loki would find a way of screwing somebody else over to see if he could get
I could see Loki with a necklace with Odin's eye on it, Heimdall's ear, some other poor guy's thumb.
He's such an interesting
behind
character.
The pool. Toss in your tongue. Toss in your tongue. Another one fell for it.
Yeah, he would absolutely 100% try to screw somebody else out over it. Yeah. He's such an interesting character. And so a lot of people, we all know, not we all, but most people know the Marvel Comics versions way better.
Right.
Where Thor and Loki are the kids of Odin. In the original Norse mythology, Loki and Thor are not brothers. Loki is the blood brother to Odin.
Right.
So at some point in their adult life, they They swore this blood brotherhood to each other, and that's the level of kinship they have. So like I like to point out to people, like, Loki is, if anything, he's Thor's uncle.
And that story is also missing of how they became
Yep.
blood. Yeah, that's another.
We don't know it. I construct a version of it in my version of Odin of how I thought it would go down, but we don't really know. We just know that they swapped blood at some point. I have a recurring line in the series about they were two scoundrels abroad in the worlds and they met. I've read this one theory that a person put forth that like Loki and Odin might even be the same person. Like that whole two sides of the same coin. Like Norse mythology is so fragmentary. Like you just don't know. There's a character that appears. Odin has his brothers that are just there for a while and then they're gone.
Right.
There's so little that survives, and even that bit's contradictory. It speaks to the people who these were made for were more familiar with it, so they'll speak very much like knowingly of something that they just assume their audience understands, but we don't have that context anymore. So just be this weird reference to like say Heimdall's hearing. We don't know what that means anymore, but back in the day you probably understood Heimdall traded his ear for something.
Yeah,
it's very interesting stuff.
Story that every child knew. So why talk about it again?
Yeah. You wouldn't have like the little editorial notes like from Smilin' Stan saying check Journey to Mystery 94 for that story, true believer. You know,
Heimdall Van Gogh himself, but not for a woman. But so you said two scoundrels abroad. I like I said earlier that Odin is perhaps my favorite fictional character. I don't know what it is about him. I love the ravens and this.
Yeah,
you unabashedly show that he's not the best guy. Odin does some downright nasty things. So it's no wonder he gets along with Loki.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's the thing to remember. Before he becomes the chief of the Aesir being like the name for the gods that live in Asgard, like there's creation myths ascribed to him. There's all kinds of stuff, but he is a dude who decided before he became this respectable figure, oh, this guy Loki is like my brother. Like they have Odin's a scumbag, and I love that. And when I draw Odin, I enjoy his looks.
Yeah, and that's another thing that you brought up. That I again, I'm a weirdo. Like I'm like thinking how. This is, I don't know. Am I telling too much about my psychology that I was a kid wondering how did Odin do it with these giant girls? You know, and you pretty much said, how is that possible? And then you just pretty much said that the Jotuns is just a name for another tribe, just like the Titans was just another name. So you had the Olympians and the Titans, the Jotuns and the Asgardians. And it just, I don't know, it just made so much sense when you described it like that.
There's a thing that people should understand about Norse mythology. Like as little as we have, even that is very much viewed through the lens of two other more well-known mythologies, Christianity and Greek mythology. Like nobody wrote down these myths while people still really believed in the Norse mythology. Right there, that's rough. It was a nation converting to Christianity. So they were writing about these past remembrances. No, he was an Icelandic politician, actually, who was, I think he was more interested in creating it as like a cultural history. Okay. I don't think he believed in these figures because nobody ever talks about this part of the Prose Edda. There is it's literally called like the intro or something, where it's him explaining how the Norse gods were actually humorized versions of figures from Greek mythology, specifically like the Trojan War and stuff. He's like, understand Odin wasn't really a god. He was actually this guy from like Greek mythology who was a king. It's very odd. Yeah, and I'm speaking with like not a lot of specificity here, but if you take a look at a copy of the Prose Edda, there's this intro where it explains how these are all like humans who the stories are told that they're gods later, and he maps them onto figures from Greek mythology because and so that's really interesting to me too. Like as a comic book nerd, you know, we love our crossovers, we love our mythologies of different stuff. Like I don't really feel like the Norse thought of their gods the way that we tend to think of them now. I think we use the word gods because we think of them in terms of the Greek gods thing. But the Norse gods are very different. They are Greek gods seem to be operating on a different level of power. Like they're like
they're
all
almost
powerful.
Unbeatable. Like they only get defeated through their own mechanizations. Where the Norse gods are vulnerable. They're almost they're almost like just humans with godlike powers. You know, they're more relatable.
And some of them, and some of them maybe don't even really have powers. If you really look at it, you're like, what exactly is your abilities that's different?
Yeah.
And and like in Norse mythology, they get old, they die, they get wounded. Like they're very different sort of beings. And the whole weird thing about Jotuns is some people started translating them as giants, not because they were big, but because they were maybe born from the earth. And giant is a Greek word that means born from the earth.
Right.
Like, and so we've given them this whole, again, we're mapping this Greek thing, but like the Jotuns are just a different, they were the outsiders, and the Aesir, the gods, the Asgardians, were the insiders. It was like, you got to think in ancient Scandinavia, it was just tribal, like it's, you know, in every place.
These are,
and they were different groups of people.
Yeah.
And then you have that whole bit, that's where that weird Frigg Freya conveyance thing, where there was the gods from Vanaheim and there was the gods from Asgard, the Vanir and the Aesir, but they have a lot of gods that seem to be the same thing. Right, Freya and Frigg are essentially the same gods. Frigg is the Aesir version. Freya is the Vanir version. Freya, the Vanir one, is married to a god named Od. Frigg is married to Odin. It's like, that's clearly the same god, just different tribal aspects of it. It's very interesting, I think.
Logic always has great questions. He asks you, do you know about the German gods, Woden, Frigg, Donner? You know.
Oh yeah. This is one of my, and they're bringing up one of my favorite things, like the fact that like we are speaking today on Tuesday. Tuesday is Tyr's Day from the Germanic version of it. But Tyr, once there's a thing called Interpretatio Romano, when the Romans, who had already taken their versions of the Greek gods out into the world, when they encountered the Germanic people, they didn't have like the, you know, your gods are fake. They're like, you know, you have the same gods as us, just different names. So if you ever go to like, say, Italy, you know, this day of the week is called Martedì, Mars Day.
Right.
And so they're like, Tyr, we call him Mars or Aries, depending where we're from. It's the same guy. And so Wednesday, Wotan's Day, is Odin's Day, but his Greek equivalent or his Roman equivalent was Mercury or Hermes, because he was the trickster, just like Odin was, the guy who's smarter than everybody else. And weirdly, Zeus or Jehovah or Jupiter, he becomes Thor because of the whole thunder connection. It's cool. I love that stuff. The weird mapping of the different gods across cultures.
Now, like, you know, this term has fallen out of favor for some strange reason, but like the Aryan gods, like, you know, we
can't imagine why people don't use that term anymore.
It's really bizarre. And for some reason, the Cosby Kids isn't on TV anymore either. I don't know why that cartoon kind of went away. But anyway, like the Indo-Europeans, for the politically correct term, like you had Pitar, you know. Deus Pitar is the Sky Father, who is Jupiter. You know, it's all.
So yeah, you know your stuff. Yeah, it's super cool, isn't it? I think that stuff's really cool. Wild.
Yeah, so it begs the question: are you going to go to Indian mythology when you're done with the Asgardians?
I would have to say I'm probably the wrong person to do that. Here's what I think. My big plan, like, even though there is the connectivity, and I do think that stuff's fascinating, I just think I'm not the person to be the one to tell that story. I think, honestly, I want to come back after finishing Asgardians. I want to go back and do more Greek stuff.
Oh, okay, that's fine to me too.
Yeah, I would always say if I ever got bored of it, I would stop. And I finished the 12 books in the original Olympian series, and it was like, I miss these characters, and there's so many more stories I could tell. By naming the series Olympians, I was kind of limited to somebody you could say was an Olympian. And even that I cheated. We won't get into that. But I would love to do like an associated series of Greek mythology exploring like minor goddesses and gods and heroes and things like that.
There's a
Probably
lot
do
of
that.
like Circe, you know,
Yeah.
that she's a goddess that like, where does she
Did
fit
you
in?
read that book by Madeline Miller, by the way?
No.
Let me throw out a plug
Yeah,
for it's a non-comic book. It's a if you were
not
somebody who enjoys
comical. Who
Greek
reads those?
mythology, I know, right? Circe by Madeline Miller. She is the same author who did a few years back, probably like 15 years now, the Song of Achilles, which is it's a retelling. Song of Achilles is a retelling of Iliad, and Circe is, you could say it's kind of a retelling of the Odyssey, but it's more. Circe is this figure who moves through Greek mythology. She is a daughter of Helios, who's the god of the sun. So it touches on like the original Clash of the Titans, not the movie, like the Titanomachy. And then she is a figure who is an important part of the Odyssey. And then there's a lost epic where she is married to like Odysseus's son. And it's all this it's such a good book. And it's really, really smart take on Greek mythology. I recommend anybody who likes Greek mythology read Circe. And if you really like it, you could find out there's a conversation of Madeline and I together. It's online. You can find clips, or you can find the whole
Cool.
thing. The two
I
of us
love that.
talking about this. Yeah. It was pretty great. Really fun talking with her. I don't often get to geek out or Greek out, however you want to say it, as much as I get to when I was talking to her. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's good. You get to be me. You get to geek out with one of your, yeah. You guys should have seen me before the camera went on. I was like that. So, do you read like Robert Graves Greek mythologies, or?
I have a copy of Graves mythology. I have one. I just remember there, I have one downstairs.
The answer to everything is mushrooms.
I still have my copy.
Mushrooms. Okay, all right.
Yep. Graves is a little dry, I will say. Yeah. Edith Hamilton, her book is hilarious. Her book is famously mythology, and like what I would say 98% of it is Greek mythology. Then there's like a little chapter at the end where they just kind of just put like a little bit of the Norse mythology in there.
It's almost like an afterthought. Yeah,
it's weird. It's like, because I guess instead of calling it Greek mythology, she wanted to do. I will always shout out Delair's Book of Greek Myths. Oh, another book. This is some challenging stuff, but this is probably the biggest influence of my series Olympians. It's a book by Roberto Calasso, Calasso, called The Marriage of Cadmus and Harmony. And it is not an exhaustive retelling of Greek myth, but it's this really beautiful poetic version of it that really, more than anything I'd read up until that point, recreates what it would be like to live in a world where you believe in those gods. And that was a very important thing for me to read, because with Olympians, like I said, it's set in mythic Greece. I want this to be in a world where like you just believe, like, yeah, up at Mount Olympus, I look up there, I don't see a temple of the gods, but I know there is one up there. Like it was very much this like recreating what it was like to be in a world where the Greek gods and those associated stories and all the monsters and weirdness that goes with it were real. And it was it's not an easy book to get through. And Calasso definitely assumes you as a reader have a great deal of knowledge about Greek mythology. He just kind of drops references that you're expected to get, but it's worth reading, definitely.
Do you think, I think I'm a superhero comic book fan, obviously, and I love my superhero movies, but wouldn't it be great to go back to classic Greek mythology movies and Norse mythology movies and historical epics like a as far as I'm concerned, we haven't had a good Trojan War movie yet. That last one.
It's weird, right? I do feel like it's an interesting thing. Like you mentioned Disney's Hercules. I just watched that again maybe in the last month. That's like terrible mythology. There's fun stuff in it. But like, you're right. They're really, especially Greek mythology, probably the best Greek mythology film, in my opinion, is Jason and the Argonauts, the old Harryhausen.
I mentioned that before, and then you were talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but is that the ground zero for everybody to get into Greek mythology in America? You know what I mean?
No,
Like,
I would say for me, it was probably more his later movie, his last movie, Clash of the Titans.
I
Like
saw that in the
that,
movies like 3 times. And I got to say, I
yeah.
think it was the first time I saw boobies too. So that movie is very influential to me in so many
Wait,
ways.
that's so okay. That is probably the first movie I saw in theaters when I was a very little kid. And I remember there's that scene where Andromeda comes strolling out of like her bath, and I'm like,
I'm like looking at my mom, like, you paid for this. You took me. This is not my fault.
this is very interesting. I
Yeah.
think this has awoken something in me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that
think
movie.
I
That's
really-
terrible
my mom, like,
mythology,
John's
though.
really into Greek mythology all of a sudden. You know,
But what I love about Jason the Argonauts is like that hews a lot closer to the original stories. The Clash of the Titans is like crappy
Yeah.
mythology, but it's a fun movie.
like they
That's
use
what-
all real monsters, real names, but the story is mixed up.
Yeah, it's all over the place.
Yeah.
I don't love that version of Zeus. Like, okay, Sir Laurence Olivier is a great actor, but Zeus is like that dude. That guy's a player. Like, he's not going to be. He's not.
Yeah.
Why is Zeus not buff?
Yeah,
Like,
if he's a
so,
shape
yeah, I
changer,
feel like-
that's not the form I would pick.
right. That's part of my Zeus, folks. If you haven't seen my books, my Zeus is modeled on Brad Pitt. Like, especially in the first book.
If you have infinite capability to appear as anything, a 90-year-old Laurence Olivier is not what I'm picking.
No, never. That never isn't. This is a dude. No, he would never look like that. I can't imagine the circumstance where Zeus is like, you know what? I'm gonna look like an old, withered guy. And like,
Right.
and Sir Laurence Olivier was a good-looking guy, better looking than me, and he's a
Right.
great actor. So I'm not crapping on him, but like, yeah, that's not what Zeus is gonna look like.
That's so funny. I remember watching, even as a kid, watching the Jason and the Argonauts, because that got me to, love. And then I remember that he got attacked by the 2-headed dog,
Yep.
and that drove me nuts. I'm like, it's a 3-headed dog. And then later on, actually, there is a 2-headed dog. And
Yeah.
so I got actually.
No, but that one does a great like that. Like, I liked. I mean, I don't know what the actor's name is. The guy who plays Heracles in that movie, like, because it's an
He's
older
cool.
dude. Yeah,
you
he was
wanna know
cool.
him. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how I pictured
Yeah.
like I never like the Marvel comics. He's this, super exaggerated muscle guy. But like let's pretend for a little that these were real people that the stories get exaggerated. Like, I'm a construction worker. There's legends of this guy who was the strongest construction worker who just retired. Like, he's only 20 years ago, but 100 years from now he's gonna lift up tanks. But he's built more like the movie actor of Hercules. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's
I will say
probably-
though, I am a big fan of the Marvel Comics version of Hercules. Like, I think they do a good job with him.
Yeah.
Sometimes they play like too much of an idiot, but like if you read the original stories, he's often an idiot. So I think it all fits in there. And like, like I wish sometimes reading the Marvel stuff that they like Stan and Jack were great creators. I love their original run on Thor and Journey into Mystery and all that stuff. But I do wish they had like maybe like read a mythology book before they started. It's kind of hilarious. Like, they're clearly operating off of just their memories of these things. Like, I was just thinking today, how Stan Lee and Jack both didn't know that Thor's hammer had a name in mythology when they started. Because they're cranking out 20 books a week. They
Right.
don't know what they're doing. So they just drew it. And so Stan makes up this word, his Uru hammer. And after a while, I think it's actually maybe Roy Thomas is like, because he's reading, he's like, well, actually, because he's a actually guy.
Right.
It's actually called Mjolnir. And they're like, well, crap. So Stan's like, oh, that's the metal it's made of. It's called Uru. But it's like, you're just pulling that out. I love it.
And I don't know if you ever read, they misspell Thor in the first Thor comic.
Yeah, he's got the 2 R's, right?
Yeah. Thor, like a pirate. Thor.
Yeah. I think they call him a demigod. I'm like, what's he a demigod of? He's got 2 parents who are gods.
Well, Stan was just like, we got to compete with Superman. We need a guy in a red cape who could fly. So they were literally like spitballing names of gods and like, Thor. Let's make Thor. Like, they had no love of mythology. And it wasn't until Jack Kirby kind of took over the comic.
Jack eventually gets into it more and brings in more mythological elements. But like, man, actually, I'll say the early Thor, where he's like just Don Blake turning into like a guy, and he's not Thor. He just has Thor's powers. That's not as good. Once they start bringing the actual mythology elements and you cut Jack loose just to go like, hey, what do you think like Super Vikings would look like? He's like, hold on a second.
Yes.
Like, and he draws like, such cool stuff. Like, I love like, it's kind of like when he's really going, like I think the title has already transitioned over to being Thor. Wait, somebody's wrote Marvel's character Volstagg the Voluminous actually looks like Thor. Yeah, he's probably more mythologically accurate because he's like a redhead with like a gut. Like when Jack is doing like the Tales of Asgard stuff, or like I always love the issues. It's actually set on Earth. It's the 2-parter where like Thor's fighting the Wrecker. And it's like drawn by Kirby, and it's so great. That was like the thing that made me appreciate Kirby when I was a kid, because I first saw his stuff. I'm like, oh, it's weird looking. And I read those 2 issues. Right? Yeah, and you didn't know you're a dumb kid. You're like, I'm a stupid kid. I know what I'm doing. But man, that like 2 issues of him fighting the Wrecker, and it's just like this amazingly well choreographed battle throughout New York with like Kirby, like he's drawn, like he's real Kirby now. It's not like early Marvel stuff. Like you see the flashes of his genius, but like he's not quite there yet. It takes him a couple of years. Like, the first few issues of Fantastic Four, it's like, it's great, but it's not like issue 50. When he's really cooking on Thor, god damn, that stuff looks amazing.
Yeah. Well, I got to get ready. I have another talk at 7 with the Pizza Betty and the guys from Alterna Comics. So is there anything that you'd like to talk about that I did not bring up yet?
No, just if you heard us talking super geeky stuff here today, people, come you can find me on Instagram. Oh, somebody's posted up my thing. GeorgeO'ConnorBooks.com. That's my website. I'm on Instagram at the George O'Connor. Yeah, my new book in Asgardians comes out October 8th. That's going to be Thor. This one right here.
And it's
Odin is available everywhere. First, second, you could get any of the Olympians books. There's 12 of them, just about anywhere. Yeah. But this was fun. This was really fun to come on here and talk. I apologize again for how hard it was to get me.
That's okay. Again, I that's one of the things I got. Comic book people are, no offense, notoriously flaky. You're not the first, and you won't be the last.
I'm literally conducting this interview from my drawing desk, and as soon as it's over, I'm going to go back to drawing. This is what we do. We draw all day, and when you draw, you go into other worlds of your own creation, and you just don't remember to answer emails sometimes.
It's funny. I was just talking with somebody else earlier today about how one of the things I'm grateful is that I do work outside with people. Like I've been home now for 5 weeks after this accident. I'm going crazy. My friend came and took me out to lunch just because they're like reading my messages. I was getting weirder and weirder. And I go, I haven't yet achieved comic book artist weirdness yet. Just living.
No, it's good.
Yeah.
You don't want to do that. If you're not a comic book artist, you have comic book artist weirdness. Like people just avoid you.
Then you get crazy hair like this. So that's great. You're going to go back. So what are you going to call your next series then? Obviously, it's not going to be Olympians when you go back.
Good question. I'm open to ideas. If anybody comes up, I was thinking Tales of the Olympians is still the same problem. It's Olympians is a bit of a brand name now, so I kind of want to have it in there.
Greek heroes.
Yeah, I don't know. Myths. I don't know. How about myth heads? Is that good? You think? Probably won't get me there.
Never give us the Odin Spear, Gunnar the Swing, whatever Odin threw a spear that never missed. There's a lot of cool things. Like he had the ring.
Dropnir, his ring that every 9 days it drops 8 identical copies of it. So you can just take it and just stick it in a vault, and he's infinitely wealthy in a long enough time scale.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of.
So I will say, I think Walt Simonson did bring in Gungnir. He didn't make a big deal of it. I think he had a bit because he also brings in the Ravens. They really weren't part of it. Like
right.
He's
the Cask of Ancient Winters was an actual mythological thing that I didn't know. I thought Walt Simonson had made that up.
No, he's so good, man. He read that stuff and he brought in all this cool old bits, and he tried to retrofit. It's just like there's so many major characters from Norse mythology that just don't like get an appearance, so it's just like he tried. He did great. Everyone should read Walt Simonson's Thor. It's like the best. Sleipnir, yes. Odin's 8-legged horse, who, if you don't know the story, Loki's his father.
Yep.
Loki turned himself into a lady horse and seduced the horse Svadilfari. So
Yep.
yeah, Norse mythology, it's fun.
That's why Loki's a bro. He does that all. He does what he has to do to get it done. And just so
He
you
has
know,
weird kids.
Walt Simonson hasn't said no. I've been talking to him on and off for 9 months to come on the channel. So
yeah. Oh, I've been fortunate to meet him a few times. I don't expect he would particularly remember me, but I think he is one of the most delightful creators. Like,
I met him once,
dude.
I met him right before Thor 337 came out with the first Beta Ray Bill, his first Thor comic.
Wow.
You know, I just happened to meet him at a Comic-Con, and he was, you know, telling everybody how excited he was to do this comic. And I was just a little kid, you know, came up to talk to him, and he was, you know, I was one of those actually kids, and he was wonderful. Such a pleasant guy. Him and John Byrne. Can you imagine that, hanging out together?
No, I can't. I see John Byrne seems like such a prickly sort on his message boards.
Oh, Can
I share really quickly my
please
Walt
do.
Simonson story? Same thing. Sure. I'm a kid. It's a little bit after that. He is wrapping up Thor, but it's right before he jumped to X Factor. So I was a little kid. I had loved his Thor. So I showed up at my local comic shop where he was doing a signing with Louise Simonson right before, this is before X Factor came out, but they were there promoting it in anticipation. And I was dressed up as Spider-Man because, you know, I did. And I got some Thors signed and stuff. And he was so great. And he and Luis were just sitting there talking to me. And then me and my buddy who were hanging out there, he was telling us all the stuff they were going to be doing with X Factor. The two of them were. And they said, like, yeah, so Angel's going to lose his wings and you're going to think he's dead, but he's going to get robot wings. And he showed us a sketch of this, which didn't look like, if my memory serves, looked a bit different than what actually appeared, but was telling us that, like, basically that they were going to take this character of Angel in the first few issues of their book, the original X-Men, and turn him into Archangel. And like, we're these dumb little kids. We're like, wow. And I just remember that being the longest wait ever. Like, you know, it was because you're a kid and we had this secret knowledge that this one character who you thought was going to be dead was like actually going to come back with metal wings and stuff. And it seemed like it was years until it happened. It was probably like 6 months. But like, just the fact that the two of them, he and his wonderful wife, Louise, took the time to sit there with these two dumb kids and tell us this stuff.
That is awesome.
It's amazing, right? Yeah,
that is cool. Yeah, that is cool. If Twitter existed back then, you would have spoiled the comic, you know?
Yeah, I'm like, oh, don't worry, Angel coming back with wings. Yeah, the drawing he showed, as I recall, like, it still looked like it had feathers, but they were energy crackling around them. Like, it must have been a design before he streamlined it into the look. Cool stuff. Great guy.
Yeah, he was great. And well, John Byrne was on stage, so he wasn't going to be nasty to a little kid on stage in front of everybody. Okay. So everybody has a prickly John Byrne story, but he was as good as gold to me.
Man, my wife doesn't let me mention the name of John Byrne in my house because I mention him too much. She's like, "You got."
Oh, really? Yeah, he's my holy grail to come in and talk to. So
it'll man, yeah.
I email him like once a month, knowing full well that goes into like an abyss of fire. He won't do any. Yeah, but you don't.
I'll keep my fingers crossed. I would love to see, like, yeah, I would love to see him do more appearances out there because he seems to mostly only direct people through Byrne Robotics. And
I think I was banned in 18 minutes. On Byrne Robotics. I didn't last too long.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. But thank you so much.
This was really fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to have you back. You know, we'll talk about the Asgardians when the Asgardians. How you said 4 comics? So what is that? 2 years?
The 4. So yeah, no, could be less actually, probably.
Oh, wow.
Thor comes out. Thor comes out October 8th. Loki comes out. Oh no, it is 2 years. Loki comes out about a year after that, and the 4th and final volume of Asgardians is going to be called Ragnarok. I finally going to finish that story I started when I was a little kid. I'm going to draw the story of the death of the Norse gods. Can't wait.
There you go. And then the Thunderers, your own comic, will be coming out. Right?
That'll bring Thunderers back. Good memory. Wow.
But thank you so much, man. This was a pleasure. I'm beaming. How is Pete Sametti ever going to live up to this? We'll find out.
He'll do it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, John.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Bye, everyone.